Chapter 10. Breath Suspension, an Art to Achieve Silence. Silence of mind is very significant virtue that must be built in personality, and if not, it must be cultivated as an essential prerequisite to step into being and to be beyond time and space. Silence is an integral part, and it is the most peaceful state of a human being. The silent state is basically wordless, thoughtless, and breathless state. On negation of breath and suspension of breath, mind is negated. It is annihilated and silence appears. In presence of breath, varieties of thoughts are sprouted and silence is withdrawn from the mental plane. Silence is not merely to be wordless, or just keeping quiet is not silence. To observe Maun, keeping quiet is a primitive silence. It is outwardly silence. Absolute silence prevails when one is within the self and soul. Consciousness is merged in the supernal, and one is in superconscious state. Other modes of silence are just the relative silence. One can easily communicate in relative silence when the receiver is also in silence. The higher level of relative silence can produce ideas, and it can receive the thoughts and signals. In silence, one can dream. Dream state is also a type of silence state. Basically, mouth is shut, but all the senses are in working state, and senses are opened to receive thoughts from conscious and subconscious mind. A mute picture goes on in the mind. It is a state of relative and a temporary silent state. In short, in this dream state, one himself is observer, but he is not awakened. If one is awakened, then he cannot dream. He will be in a dreamless state. Absolute silence is dreamless state. The suspension of consciousness and subconscious states only lead to the higher state of silence. It is the state of mergence. It is the state of consciousness with discontinuities. It is only possible when one enters from dreamy to sushupti deep slum state to turiya transcendent state, when mind is annihilated and breath is partially suspended. In general, in the silent state, all the sense organs, that is karma indriyas, kayana indriyas, and tanmantras become functionless. Also, it is possible to achieve while using shunyaka technique, since under shunyaka there is no breath, as if the state of suspension of breath has occurred. Therefore, when all the indris or senses are functionless, then mind does not react, because it does not get energy since breath is suspended. It has been established that mind traps energy from breath, and so, under suspension of breath, the higher degree of relative silence prevails. In this state, there is no provocation and no objective, subjective, and nor subjective objective reactions of the mind is present. There is not action-reaction in the mind, and nor any subjective or objective motivation operates in the mind. It is the state of higher degree of relative silence. However, as soon as any outside memory enters, the silence of mind is disturbed. Also, it can be disturbed even by inside subconscious thoughts. Any mutative horizontal breath disturbs the equilibrium of silence. Breath has multiple complex vibration pattern of external world. It disturbs the silence to the major extent by the multiplicity of thoughts. This may lead to propagate and create the various desires that can disturb the inner developed silence completely or partially. Basically, absolute silence prevails only in the state of samadhi or mergence and in the turiya transcendent states. In other states, one gets only the semi-silence. By alertness, being in consciousness, one can prolong a relative semi-silence by yoga practices. A simple breath can change the scenario of spiritual feeling, and irrelevant, mundane feeling can pour in mind, resulting in disturbing the silence achieved. One must understand that silence is very mutative. No one can be in silence for a long duration by conscious and semi-conscious efforts. However, these are the only means to be in the relative silence. Ego in the consciousness can appear by Maya that brings various desires. Desires invite pleasures and memories which give rise to grow other series of desires that subsequently attack the existing silence very violently. This leads to change the thoughts and affects the mind, and also provocates the mind, leading to suffering both subjectively and objectively by spoiling the silence completely. On the contrary, real relative silence achieved by consciousness and then enhanced by turiya transcendent state certainly brings absolute partial silence. Absolute partial state of silence continues till the soul light or consciousness prevails and increases. However, if the state is transformed gradually into unconsciousness or unawareness under the umbrella of soul light, it gives the bliss of absolute silence and happiness. Soul light is above any mutation, and hence it gives real silence. It is the stateless state of the Absolute. Jiva being is I-ness, and Jiva, if accompanying the soul, it is termed as Jivatma, that is, personalized soul. It affects the sanity of the soul, its true divine light, and hence the absolute silence cannot prevail in the presence of Jiva. Therefore, desireless attitude and rebellious attitude cannot be silenced and controlled in the presence of Jiva. The silence can only be partially established if senses are properly trained to have qualities like that of a soul which is non-mutative, so that the desires of Jiva are temporarily dissolved. In other words, one must be Jitendraya, the winner of the dynamic desires of the senses, so as to be in the silence without getting provoked by any gimmick and desire of the senses. One needs to propitiate the breath so as to negate it by its own mercy to merge into silence, such that the breath does not disturb to be in silence. One must learn the art to be Pavanjaya, that is, the winner of breath, and he must be able to command the breath. Existence of breath in the body shall be in his control so as to be in the zone of silence. The silence is the super commander, but it can be destroyed by any horizontal worldly urge very easily. Alertness, awareness, or consciousness is to be strictly observed to prolong the silent state. There must not be any reaction because of any type of the horizontal worldly disturbances. One should be in rock-like silence. It is only possible when aspirant is above the limitation of consciousness. He must be beyond consciousness. Any type of consciousness in the horizontal plane, including subconsciousness, must not disturb the silence. All subjective and objective symptoms of any kind are to be nullified and must be shut down. Shunyaka and breath suspension are the most effective techniques to invite and enhance the silence. However, any horizontal breath can disturb the silence any moment. The silence zone is very delicate and very critical zone. Prolonging or elongation of the silence in the human life are really very difficult tasks, like Kurukshetra Sangram or war. It is extremely difficult to increase the period of silence. It is just like to arrest the wind without solid boundaries. Silence cannot be achieved by physical and mental efforts. If by active conscious efforts the silence is tried, then there are chances that one suffers in subconscious state and many disturbances are surfaced again and again on the conscious level from the subconscious state. Any subconscious feelings always try to disturb the silence with full vigor. So, the memory of the subconscious should be avoided by using shunyaka or void methods. However, it is very difficult to control the higher forces of microcosm and macrocosm and to avoid them to react so as to maintain the achieved silence. One could only forcefully and consciously try such that subconscious thoughts must not make the unknown linkages to disturb the silence. Even reacting and answering the conflicting issues might disturb the achieved silence. The best approach is to just observe the thoughts. One must witness the thoughts without any reaction. Any good or bad thoughts must be observed, witnessed, but not entertained. Soon the thoughts will disappear and silent state will be continued. In short, thoughts must be taken as uninvited guests. Sometimes one has to keep artificial outer behavior to avoid the conflicts, but inside poison of disturbances may churn more violently to create an era to destroy the inner silence. However, one must always try to get fake silence inwardly if the external conflicts are severe and beyond control. But it will be far away from the real inner silence. This is needed practically in life, since no situation, under any condition, is in our control. To live in the society, one has to become outwardly civic by observing the fake inward and outward culture of silence. However, for a long time, such action and reaction of the outward conflicts cannot be avoided easily. These are very mutative. By ocean of inbuilt inner silence and philosophical inward inclination, this can be made possible. To keep silence, one must act subjectively, but objectively, one must not react. To be silent, one needs to learn this art of being inact. It basically requires separating the inner world from the outer world. This is the only judicial way to be inwardly silent. Tide and waves of disturbances of outer world must be kept on the surface, and inwardly one must be silent and calm like an ocean. This above technique is the art of enactment to make the fortress of inward silence. Enactment is only feasible by having complete command on breath, by being consciously alert and by controlling one's own emotions and reactions, etc. The best approach is to observe the breath silently to divert the mental attention. Enactment way of control to keep silence is not easily possible for one's own kith and kin. If one is disturbed inwardly in subconsciousness, then his outward silence positively gets affected. The only way is to shield subconsciousness by all possible means and conquer over rebellious thoughts of actions and reactions to preserve silence. However, even for a highly spiritual advanced aspirant, it is not easily possible when one's own nearest are involved. To be with the breath silently is the only way. To be with the discontinuity of the breath is very effective. However, it is difficult to maintain and continue with time. By controlling the own outward reactions, the inward silence is likely to be positively disturbed. But for a common worldly man, with his outward reactions, the subconsciousness is not affected, since he lacks sensitivity, being unrefined. But spiritual aspirant at times affects his mental and physical health by keeping mute word lessons and ossiferous silence till he clears his subconsciousness by rebellious thoughts. This above is because the spiritual science does not teach reactions and allows only actions, and at the same time makes a person highly sensitive. So, in any active horizontal self-evolved problem, an aspirant suffers to the greatest extent, but for a common worldly man, this is just a normal suffering. This is because of suppressing of natural feeling of reactions to keep the outward silence by a spiritual aspirant. Its reaction to the inward personality is enormous and highly critical. Only breath control can come to rescue a sensitive person under these circumstances. In short, relative silence is mutative. To be in silence, the reaction of the self must be much less from an aspirant due to his capacity of tolerance. However, inwardly he gets disturbed because of the involvement in horizontal activities, even if he follows the path of enactment. Breath control is the only solution for him. The absolute silence can only be achieved in samadhi, and it is achieved to take step into being, and to be in beyond time and space. In all other states and controls, one gets mutative relative silence. This is the only relative semi-silence. For horizontal life, even this is an asset to live in peace. Furthermore, silence is Maya. Maya is arbitrary and mutative, and so the silence is never permanent. It changes with time and space and causation. Maya is awareness, consciousness, and so the relative silence is awareness. By being aware and fully vigilant, one can save himself to fall down from the state of relative mental silence. However, absolute silence is the act of superconsciousness. It can only be achieved to step into being and to be beyond time and space. In silence, mind is annihilated, breath is suspended, one becomes consciousless with discontinuities. However, he returns to conscious state with manifested consciousness with divine energy. This world is Maya, so its negation is also Maya. Suppression of consciousness of reaction is Maya as well. It can sprout out of mind from time to time. Maya is Shakti, and It can ascend vertically upwards. It is a Kriya Shakti, and this is no different from source light. It is awareness, and it is also a part of Brahma, that is, the Creator. Its dialectic possibility is Brahma. Maya is very merciful. It is graceful. One must worship Maya. Then only it may give way for the transcendental journey to merge with the supernal. By its grace only, one can cross the barrier of relative silence to be in the absolute silence, that is, non-awareness. It helps to arrive to the doorstep of samadhi, that is, the mergence. It is basically to ascend from para-apara level to para-para level of silence, that is, from the consciousness silence, that is, with the efforts to the silence without awareness and without efforts. It is possible only to take step into being and to be beyond time and space. If it is achieved, then it is called Sahaj silence, which is nothing but the absolute silence. It is the stage of mergence of soul with the supernal. Breath is completely suspended. There is no breathing process in this stateless state. The para-apara silence, being at the state of awareness, controls the memories of the subconscious state that creates the sufferings in the relative silence. This silence has to work against memories and make the aspirant to suffer much more than experiencing the actual happenings of miseries. A memory of the subconscious state is the worst. However, deep sleep is very helpful to forget such memories to ascend to the zone of silence. Sleep without dream is the best for the complete relaxation and to be in silence without memories. Silence is the rest of mind. However, conscious silence is illusion. Rest of mind is basically out of any action and reaction, even if the mind is awake. Such state of mind is wakeful rest. Observations of fresh breath to enter and used breath to escape is the wakeful rest of the mind. This is Maya. Maya is wakeful and consciousness activity with awareness. Also, rest of mind even without action or reaction under these conditions is Maya, that is, the relative silence. Any moment it can be disturbed. Even a single ferocious breath can completely destroy the silence. Maya, the relative silence, cannot take the spiritual aspirant to the stage of samadhi. Even in transcendental state, it is partially Maya, and the divine light is Mahamaya. It is much beyond the senses to conceive. Mahamaya is Mother, and by her grace, the divine path becomes approachable. It is Para Shakti. It is Tripura Sundari. All of us beg for her blessings for success in the spiritual path. One can only put his efforts, but granting grace is her prerogative and mercy. Mahamaya is an active part of Almighty, and only through this, silence can be achieved by following the vertical path and finally to reach an unmanifested stage, that is, to be in absolute silence in the stage of samadhi or mergence, to be beyond time and space. One need not brood more on the past and try his best to forget past to come over subconscious state and then overcome conscious state to finally land in the superconscious state of perfect silence. Tranquil breath is very helpful under these conditions. If one does not learn to be silent in his life, he is bound to suffer, particularly in old age, when even kith and kin will not listen and follow him even his positive advice. earlier one learns how to be silent, the better it is for positive and prospective living for him. The other inner meaning of silence can be taken as detachment. If one does not feel concern, he remains silent, and in other words, it can be said that he is not attached, he is fully detached. By mantra chanting, the inner silence can be enhanced. Silence is the power of God. One must be silent to be with the Almighty. Generally, worldly people lose silence in views of the various problems being experienced by them from their kith and kin. However, it must be remembered that kith and kin have their own prarabdha. We are just the instruments for their birth and to bring them into this world. Furthermore, silence is taught and understood by the subjective attitude. It is by physiological way of understanding the net situation. By objective means, silence cannot be cultivated. Our soul, being unmanifested, subjective dormant light, is the institution of silence within us. Our soul helps us in silencing the mind, which in turn is the source and guide to put full stop for the wandering of senses unduly for worldly issues and problems. Breath acts as a master to resolve the various complex issues related to mind and senses. Consciousness is a very powerful instrument to maintain silence by self-efforts. Para-silence in the hands of Turiya, Mahamaya, can grace silence both in vertical and horizontal journey of life. Sita, the life force, meets Ram in the Chiraksha through Setu bridge of Sushmana provided by Maya through conscious awareness of relative silence. Hanuman, the embodiment of silence, did show humility, even being capable of bringing Sanjeevani within few hours. He did not act until Ram instructed him to bring for Lakshman when he was unconscious. Silence is the manifestation of capability and humility, and one must not misunderstand it even in worldly dealings. Even Ravana observed the power of silence during war with Rama and instructed his own Vaidya to attend Lakshmana when he was unconscious. Ravan understood that this war is the Dharma Yuddha, so by the power of his mental silence and without irritation followed the ethics of the war. This is all because of inner silence that guided him in the moments of crisis. Being internally in the state of absolute silence, he knew Ram the avatar of Vishnu the god and wanted to be killed by him in the war. In short, silence always gives positive results when one is not egoistic but silent. Agitated or disturbed breath can spoil the cultivated or developed silence. Yoga can evolve energy but cannot bring silence. Subtle ego developed out of jnana or knowledge is much more dangerous than the gross ego and can disrupt the silence within no time. Even great rishis like Narada have failed because of the subtle ego which led him to confront with the Narayana, the god. In Maya, consciously one considers rope as snake, but when enlightenment approaches, ignorance disappears. Even unconsciously, one finds that rope is not snake and vice versa. The best and the safest path to achieve silence is to be with the God, to be beyond time and space, surrender to Him, to come to a Sharanagati to Him as a child, feel carefree and safest as a child with the mother. Mother takes full care in all respects and keeps the child comfortable. Surrender brings Param Mauna, the absolute silence. Death is the mode of permanent silence. However, suspension of breath is the path of silence. To be conscious of silence is the relative silence. Sadashiva, the mergence of Shiv and Shakti, soul and supernal, and the Samadhi are the absolute silence.
And it is easily possible if the life force penetrates Ichhanari gate at Dahara Chakra, then it passes through Apurna Bhav that leads easily to supernal, that is, mergence or samadhi and state of absolute silence.
Thus, it is seen that various factors govern the silence, and all are in the hands of Almighty, since abode of silence is the God Himself. It is to take step into being and to be beyond time and space. In short, silence is the highest state to absorb the divine energy to manifest consciousness for healthy and happy extended life. However, breath is God. It enlightens by projecting different means and directions